We were near Amboy. We were camping with, I think, Jeff and Lois, Trophy and Barb and Vic and Nikki, some former members of the congregation, and we had set up. We were there in our round. Each of us had responsibilities for different meals during the time, and my meal was that evening. I was responsible, and I had set up. And I was doing
teriyaki basil chicken on the grill, and I had the previous night, of course, we had a storm. And so all of the wood is saturated with water, and I'm trying to get this fire going with saturated wood, and I just barely get it going. The wood is starting to dry out, starting to become something that I could possibly, maybe at some time later that evening, cook over. And then the clouds begin to roll in. I'm still working to get this fire going, and just about the time the fire gets going, I'm putting the chicken on to begin to get it cooking. We hear the tornado whistles blow. We're out in the middle of nowhere. Campground's 10 miles from Amboy, Illinois, and I've got chicken on the grill. My wife gets the older kids in the car and gets ready to go over to the storm shelter. She actually drives off and then comes back and says, "Get in the car!" She's scared to death that something's going to happen to me. I think they said they saw the funnel cloud at some point, and I'm just like, I can't leave. I've got to get my chicken cooked. I just got it going. I can't let the fire go out. And they're getting excited, and they're getting terrified that Dad's going to get torn away by this tornado. And I'll let you know, it was probably the juiciest chicken I've ever had. We all have storms, don't we? We've all sat through some kind of storm that got us concerned for our safety. Driving back on Thursday, we're coming in from Alabama into Tennessee, and we get hit by a rainstorm that I would have never stopped in the past, but I decided I'm getting older. I'm going to play it safe. Pulled into the nearest rest stop, waited for the rain to stop, and let it pass. There was another time I was up in Wisconsin at a camp. I was on the faculty of the camp that week as a representative from Lincoln Christian University. Was there on the camp team, and I was out on the lake with a couple of other campers. We were in a 3-man canoe. And the camp is located on an island. And so you would take the canoe around the island. And as we get about halfway around the island, it's about a 2-mile trip, 1-mile circuit each way. As we get on the other side of the island, a storm blows up and begins to rock that canoe, and we're pretty sure that the canoe is going to flip over if we don't get to land first. So we go over and we land and we wait out the storm. We've been there, haven't we? A few years ago, about 50 years ago, here in Oak Lawn, a tornado hits Oak Lawn and destroys much of the town. Some of you were here for that. Some of you know people who were affected by that. We all have storms, but it's not just the weather that provides the storms in our lives. We also get hit by a variety of other storms that just as unexpectedly seem to blow up from nowhere and seem to bring chaos into our lives. It's that call into the boss's office that says, "I'm sorry, you've done good work for us, but we need to cut back." And you feel the winds begin to blow. It's that conversation with the spouse, where the spouse says something like, I don't want to be married anymore. And the winds grow stronger and begin to beat against us, and we begin to feel like these winds are going to take us down. It's the visit at the doctor's appointment. The doctor comes in and says, well, I've got good news. Well, maybe not so good. Let's get to the bad news. It's that evening where your health has deteriorated so much that you're sitting in their bathroom at the toilet and you're feeling like tonight is the night that I'm going to die. We've all been through those storms, some of them magnificent in their power, some of them not so threatening, but we still feel the effects of those storms in our lives. We still feel the effects of those times where our children make decisions that make us cry, that tear at our hearts, that make us wonder, where did I go wrong? We have those that are close to us pass away. Some of them unexpectedly, some of them way beyond their time, and we feel the full force of the gale as it bears down upon us, and we are sure that we are sunk. That this time the storm is too big for us. This time the storm will take us down because we just don't have the strength to fight through it. You've been there, haven't you? You've felt the pelts of the raindrops of disappointment and sadness and grief. You felt the swells of bitterness, of rage, of resentment. Sometimes you begin to ask God, why are you letting me go through this? Better yet, God, why are you making me go through this? It's in the context of those kind of storms that we live our life in, that we have the story occur in Mark chapter 4. Beginning at verse 35, it says, on that day, when evening had come, he said to them, let us go across to the other side. Here, Jesus is saying, well, we're going to go across to the other side. We're on this side of the lake. I've been teaching. Usually what he would do at that point, he'd be teaching. He'd have a large crowd. He'd get exhausted. He'd get tired. And he'd say, it's time for me to take a retreat. Let's go to the other side of the lake so that I can get refreshed and renewed, reinvigorated, so that I can come back and be fully engaged in the ministry that I am here for. You know, some of us need to learn to do that. Some of us do need to learn that we can't always run our lives at full pace. Sometimes it's a time where you got to step back, slow the pace, get rejuvenated, restored, so that you can re-engage. And Jesus says, let's do that together. And when Jesus says, let's do something together, Jesus can be held to his word. Jesus is saying, well, we're going to go across the lake. Let's go across the lake. You can take that as a guarantee. We will get across the lake because Jesus said we're going across the lake. It's not like some of us say, let's drive across town, and we get across town, or we start to drive across town, and somebody cuts us off, and we run to the back of the car. We have a car accident, and say something unforeseen. Jesus is saying, we're going across the lake. And when Jesus says it, you can bank on it. Let's go across the lake. And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and the other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose. And the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. Okay, this isn't one of those places where you can say the disciples are overreacting. You know those people that as soon as the boat starts to sway a little bit, begin to exaggerate. The boat's going down. It's going down. We're going under. That's not what's happening here. Mark makes clear that the boat is actually going under. It's filling with water as the story is going on. This isn't, well, the waves are coming up, they're hitting the side of the boat. This is, the waves are coming into the boat. They're breaking and they're filling the boat up, and the guys are there with their little tin cups or whatever they have, scooping as fast as they can to try to get that out of there because the boat's going under. You get that? We've been there, haven't we? Not just that place where we feel a little bit threatened by life, but that place where we really feel like this time we're going under. This time the boat's filling up. We can't get it out faster than it's coming in, and we don't know what's going to happen. And here the water is coming in and coming in. What's Jesus doing about it? Disciples are in full panic mode. Absolute distress. Verse 38, but he, Jesus, was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. Now, you need to understand something about the boats that they were talking about. The boats held about 12, 15 people. They were probably from here to about here long. And at the front of the boat, there was this place that right here, that it was the only place that you could get out of the weather at all in these kind of boats. It had sort of like a patio cover here. And Jesus had climbed up under that patio cover. He wasn't being disturbed by the storm, by the rain, by the water coming in. He was safely, comfortably under that shelter, and he was covered. He was sleeping on his pillow. He was perfectly fine. You know what it tells me is that Jesus intentionally went there. Jesus knew where he was going. It wasn't by accident that Jesus was asleep. It was all part of what was going on. He's there. He's asleep. The disciples are in an uproar. And Jesus is at peace. I don't know what that's like because I'm not that good of a sleeper. I mean, the first wave to hit the boat, I would be awake. I don't know what that's like. I can't relate to Jesus there in that sovereignty, that peacefulness of being able to sleep in the midst of everything, in the midst of chaos, in the midst of everyone else thinking life is going down. But he was. And so they woke him up, and they said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" That question betrays something about the disciples. It gives us a clue of something that isn't so flattering, but it is also something that is so very true about us. That sometimes when those storms begin to whip up in our lives, when the chaos begins to happen, we begin to question the sincerity of Jesus' concern for us. But that's not what Jesus is concerned about. You see, they're concerned about we're in the midst of a storm, and Jesus is saying, you missed the point. You're concentrated on the storm. You're looking at the storm. You're seeing the wind. You're seeing the waves. It's the same thing that happened to Peter when Peter, of all of the disciples, was brave enough to get out of the boat. He was at least that brave in another story. He got out of the boat and began to walk towards Jesus. But when he took his eyes off Jesus and began to notice the waves, he sank. When we become so preoccupied with the storm that we forget the one that we are with, we're in trouble. You see, Jesus had told them, we are going across to the other side. Instead of taking the promise of that word, saying we're going across to the other side, Jesus said that we're going across to the other side. They're in a panic thinking, we're not going to make it. Jesus said it. I can trust it. It's true. I can claim it. I can grab hold of it. I don't have to question it. Jesus still cares. But in the midst of caring, Jesus never says, I won't let storms happen. I made a visit to somebody in the hospital. And the person in the hospital was sharing that the battle that they're going through has really caused them in a way like never before in their life to come to Christ. They played the game for 60-some years. They've done the role. They've led. They've been a leader in a church ministry kind of way. But he said, really, the battle that I've been going through for the last several months has led me to really come to faith. I wouldn't have come there if it hadn't been for this battle. Laura Story wrote the song, The Blessing. And in that song, The Blessing, she tells of all of the little things, all the chaos that goes on in our life, all of the things that make us question, all of the things that make us wonder, does God really care? Has he turned his back on us? And she says, maybe we need to change our context of looking at those things and understand that those trials are meant to be blessings that grow our faith. But they only grow our faith as we learn to trust the one who we are with. And so Jesus awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Calm down. Just calm down. I think the text says that he said that to the sea, but I think there's also the level to which he was saying that for the overhearing of the disciples, for them also to be at peace. Just calm down. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. Jesus' words were able to do what their souls, what their spirits had given up hope for. Jesus, the man in their presence, showed his dominance over the created order, his ability to take the creation of God and submit it to his will. And what's the response of the disciples? How do they respond to this one who in all of his magnificence can simply say, shh, and the waves grow calm? He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the seas obey him?" What are you afraid of? What causes you to turn in fear, to begin to seize up, to begin to throw up your hands and say, "It's not worth it, I can't win, this has beat me, I've been destroyed, I've been put down"? What is it that you fear? I want you to notice that fear occurs 2 times here. There's the fear of the storm, and it's that they were afraid. But after Jesus calms the storm, he turns to them and asks them a question, and then it says that they were terrified. They were actually terribly terrified. Some of us are more afraid of the circumstances in our lives than we are of God's involvement in our lives. Some of us need to have more respect and more awe at God and His acts of things in our lives than the things that are happening to us. To trust that God is bigger than those things that are happening. To trust that God is stronger than the strongest threats that can be thrown in our direction. To trust that God is bigger than the biggest universe. That God is more magnified and more present and more powerful and more majestic than anything that we could ever dream of happening to us. God is bigger. Now, the terribly terrified doesn't mean that we have to cower at God as if God's going to destroy us. The term there, the real term for fear scripturally has to do with being set in awe. The terribly terrified is that they were completely awestruck by this one who was able to calm the storm. If you were completely set at awe, if you were awestruck at the one that you come to worship, how would that change your worship? If you were to move from a place of complacency at worst, but maybe half-hearted worship at best, to a place of full-blown awe and wonder, like Isaiah entering into the temple of God and seeing God revealed to him in His fullness of majesty, and the seraphim there singing praise to God and saying, "Oh, I've been set free, God is God, and I realize the sinfulness that's within me, and I submit it to God." How would standing before God and really being in awe of Him change how you worship? For some of you, that would set you on your feet and set you dancing. Well, you wouldn't want that to be my expression, believe me. For me, it probably put me on my knees. On my knees before God, repenting of God to God, recognizing that my brokenness and my sinfulness before Him, but it wouldn't be just oh great, it's God, Jesus is here, so it's marvelous to have Him in the house today. What would it do if you recognize that God is indeed bigger than everything you've ever faced? Every fear you've ever confronted, every hope that you've ever had dashed, every moment of conflict that departed from His peace, every love that left you brokenhearted, it is well with my soul. Philip Safford wrote that song after his wife and daughters were on a cruise across the Atlantic and the ship went down. He got on another ship from New York, headed to London to catch up with, or to be there. And as they arrive at the point where the ship went under, the captain told Philip Safford, "This is the place where your wife and your daughters passed." And to that, Philip Safford went back to his room and sat down and began to write that song. And the sea billows begin to roll. It's well with my soul. God, I may not be able to make sense of it right now. I may be overwhelmed by the grief, but I still trust that you are bigger than this storm. Let's pray together. God, we've all been through the storm. Some of us are going through it right now. God, I thank you for those that have learned the lesson that you are big enough to be trusted. That you set us in awe when we really see you at work. God, for those who are going through that storm right now, God, I pray for them that they will be able to take their eyes off the wind and the waves, the stirrings, the struggles, and be able to look at you and to know that you are big enough to get them through. God, build that faith in us. In Christ's name, the church said.